Apparently my batteries are low. Yeah, while you're just, I just leave you with one thought as you're thinking of your first question. What I really got out of this is, get back to where I started. Framework policies are good, but perhaps not enough. Highly directed government policies haven't worked as well. Clusters are a source of productivity growth, and I think the message here is don't try to create clusters. There's some well-known international examples of countries that have actually deliberately gone out and tried to create them. They haven't been very successful. But where we have some successful clusters, direct government policy to double down on the ones that are winning. And be a little less Canadian and to sort of spread it around less and focus on the winners. And what we've tried to do is, the policy prescriptions are really quite straightforward. I think what is different about this is the idea that don't just build infrastructure. Think about your successful clusters as you design your infrastructure policy and double down on your winners. The winners, there's too much policy basically that is supporting struggling sectors. We need policy more directed to doubling down on our winners. With that, I will open it to questions.
Just got a mic coming.
Thanks. So basically, from my own research, I see that, yes, you cannot just create a cluster anywhere. It won't work. But more than thinking about creating clusters, we have to think about upgrading clusters. So there are many regions that there were clusters before, because of the way the economy went. They just lost competitiveness and they lost factories, and so there are many regions, for example, in Kitchener-Waterloo, they were able to upgrade because of the environment that existed there allowed it to upgrade. But then you have something like the Hamilton area that it's upgrading based on, life sciences, for example, but it's not really bringing real innovation. So I think the question is how to upgrade into the new economy, the new industries, and how to develop those clusters that are really going to bring competitiveness into Ontario.
So I'm going to challenge the question a little bit. I think Hamilton's actually a really fascinating example of a place that's trying to shift to Plan B faster than maybe some of the other parts of the province. When you look at what they're doing in life sciences as well as on water and water technology, for a place that was the home of steel and some paper for a long time, for sure the Great Recession wiped out certain sectors. I mean, they're trying, especially with their education base and their hospital base on the life sciences side, and it feels like if I were in their shoes, that's as solid a bet from a cluster development as possible. Where I do worry, and I don't know what the policy answer is in the short term, and I don't know what Tiff would have to say about it, is more northern or remote towns that were single industries. That's where my concern goes. Hamilton has some options. If you were a logging or a milling town, a paper town for 110 years, and people aren't buying newspapers anymore and the economy wiped you out, that's where I think there's a larger concern of how do you bring innovation and clusters back to those areas. That's what keeps me up at night on for those communities.
Thank you for the presentation. My name is Sean. My question relates primarily to clusters within clusters. So in the financial services industry, for example, my own focus is more on international trade with sub-Saharan Africa, and I find Canadian companies and Canadian businesses do not proactively engage with that conversation. But on the African continent, there's a lot of action be it in terms of Chinese investors and American investors and foreign investors. So what feedback or what thoughts do you have on how to drive that conversation within the Canadian ecosystem, within that financial cluster? Thank you.
How to drive trade with sub-Saharan Africa? It's a tough question. I think more generally, one of our, being right beside the United States has been a tremendous benefit to Ontario, indeed all of Canada, particularly Ontario. And it's been very easy to do business in the United States. We speak the same language, we're close. You know, a couple trips to the U.S., you've got yourself a deal, you're in business, common legal, fairly similar legal frameworks. Doing business, and that's been a great ride for Ontario. The last 20 years has been a fabulous ride. In the last 7 or 8 years, it's been the ride that it used to be. And going forward, you know, the reality is Ontario is losing share in the U.S. market. China has gained share dramatically. There's much more competition in the U.S. China is now the largest trader with the U.S., no longer is it Canada. And the U.S. is losing share in global markets. So basically, we're fighting. You know, we're losing share in a market that's losing share. And it gets back to the statistics Jamison had on the screen. Only 6% of our trade is with high growth emerging markets. And you know, Asia is probably the leading example of that. Africa is certainly showing some potential for some more sustained growth. You know, my only advice would be, you know, try to, you know, for Canadian businesses, you know, why go do business in sub-Saharan Africa? You know, it seems kind of risky. Never been there before. I'm not sure what the returns are. You need to really come at it from how do I break down those barriers one at a time? How do I get? How do I demonstrate their returns? One helpful, you know, the government actually through the trade commissioner offices actually can be quite helpful in giving businesses some comfort. Work through the Canadian government to another location. Things like EDC that ensure the exports, help de-risk it. So I think those would be some ideas to try to make it more attractive to Canadian business.
Yeah, I think I'd build off of one suggestion and then maybe be a little sympathetic to the corporate side. We call for an expansion and continuing double down, to use Tiff's language, on the Trade Commissioners Program. You know, there's a former colleague here who I went to a session to meet with some small business manufacturers in the parts manufacturing side in the Niagara region about productivity. And I was really governed by it's really easy to come up with suggestions sitting on the 9th floor of the Rodman building. If you're a small business owner, life it's hard. You're running a business. Let's say you've got 50 employees. Let's say it's a family business. You're running day to day, and I'm looking at them saying, "Well, why didn't you implement Annual Report 12? It's really, really great." And they say, "Well, I'm just trying to get from day to day and make payroll." So the easier you make things, I think, if you show them the products that are needed, if you show them the client base that's there, and then find an easy path towards it, I think that's going to help. I just think we need to have some sympathy for people running a business day to day. It's actually maybe a little bit harder than sometimes we in the academic world make it out to be.
Hands. Well, up and over here.
We got lots in the front.
Got lots of questions here.
They were keen enough to sit in the front, so we'll make sure we get up there.
Good morning. Bonnie Brown from the City of Mississauga. Thank you very much for this excellent piece. What am I doing? Okay. I couldn't agree more with your last comments about, you know, we need to get businesses to businesses talking more. So I'm interested in any research or thoughts that you have that how we as a municipality can encourage more business-to-business interactions.
Well, I'll give you one idea, and actually Sam DeBach is here somewhere. Sam knows quite a bit about this. He was quite involved in it, I think. You know, in Quebec, actually, perhaps because it's a close-knit, a more close-knit society, and you know, Quebec, je suis Montréalais, donc je peux parler au sujet. You know, in Quebec, they feel like they're a small island of French in a North American sea of English, and while it's a fairly competitive environment, businesses actually work better together in Quebec. And BDC, actually, Business Development Bank, was helpful in facilitating this. And, you know, in Ontario, I think maybe it's a bit our Anglo-Saxon roots. We all like to kill each other. So businesses all like to compete against each other. You sort of forget that, well, we're a pretty small province in a big world, and actually there'd be some benefits to actually working together and competing against the world instead of just competing against ourselves. And actually, Quebec has a model that's working, and in fact, there are some discussions in Ontario to see if we can get something going similar to that model. And it's about basically the way it works is some of the large. It involves some of the large financial institutions together with businesses. Government, BDC provides some facilitation, and getting back to this idea of de-risking. Well, if businesses are working together more effectively, that may de-risk some of the elements for the financial institutions to invest in these things. It also, the financial institutions give more directed advice. Okay, here's what we're looking for in your business plan. And try to work together more effectively with the idea that, Quebec companies are not competing against Quebec companies. Quebec companies are competing against Canadian companies, North American companies, world companies. We have to get a bit more of that. So there are some things going. We can talk more specifically about it afterwards.
So first of all, just thoughts are with Mississauga. Hope everyone's okay after what's happened there recently. But secondly, I would say on an annual basis, we get somewhere between 5 to 10 cold calls as ICP from companies asking us to come and consult. Like, give us your report and tell us how to implement it at our company. It's not necessarily our area of expertise, but it does feel like there's a gap out there where a municipality, an academic institution, and the local chamber of commerce could probably team up to create a toolkit, a convening table, bringing together like-minded companies. I would also recommend, if you just do it as Mississauga, you've probably missed something. The region of Peel feels like probably more the size and scope. Picking 2 or 3 sectors that you want to try to grow, and then develop the tool and develop the tool and develop the tool, and just constantly improve it would be my fastest recommendation. If you want to take a look, there's an organization out of Alberta called Go Productivity that tried to fill that gap a little bit in the Alberta context, because they were trying to show how we can get more competitive, and they said, well, we're fine, we have oil. And it turns out that maybe, yeah. Plan B.
Good morning. Thank you for including the financial services as one of the clusters. I work in risk in a bank, and I'd like to get your thoughts on what's ahead. I've just come back from Israel with a group from Ontario, and it really speaks to a wonderful opportunity around where we're uniquely placed here in Canada and Ontario and in Toronto with respect to fintech cyber. How do we get that ecosystem right? You've spoken to the themes of regulatory and the right balance between innovation and fintech, and obviously the larger institutions which obviously need to partner. I've come from the healthcare sector where I think there's some really great analogies and models. You've seen companies like Roche acquire Gentech and have a fintech complementary model. So how do we get it right? Because I think we were so proud out of 2008, as we know, we've created the Global Risk Institute, where again we can really be part of a global play and really take this risk-based approach to the model. So how can we get it right?
I actually think Toronto has a real opportunity to be a global fintech hub. Coming back to that Porter model, the key piece of that model, I think, for this one is sophisticated customers, and that's where Toronto has a real advantage. We've got 5 or 6 world-class financial institutions, 5 or 6 banks, two large life insurance companies. And I think where we need to do better, and this I think is sort of business to business, perhaps with some facilitation with government, is getting the connectivity between the fintechs and the sophisticated customers. Banks are really just starting now to get better organized internally to figure out how to engage with the fintech sector. And one of the things we're seeing is some of the fintechs, to be frank, are leaving because they're not getting access to the customers, and so we really need to improve on that front. there's sort of two kinds of fintechs too. There's some fintechs that are really trying to compete directly and take a piece of the business away from our large financial institutions. That's fine. That's competition. Most of them, though, actually are looking to work with them. And there are some very successful examples. I mean, for example, Power Corp has taken a significant stake in Wealthsimple. There's a good example of one that is working. We need some more of those examples. But I largely think it's the competitive pressure on the banking sector to get more organized and do a better job of figuring out how to engage with the fintech sector.
I'm never going to add on to an answer around risk with Tiff Macklem on the stage. But what I would say is I hope government takes a light touch, I guess would be the only concern that I would have. Much like in Toronto Life, when Toronto Life does a review of a restaurant, you can never go there because everyone's just read the same review. The day that the government comes out with the Fintech fund would be the day that I would start to get really concerned. So hopefully they create a pretty loose regulatory environment for the time being to allow the industry to grow from the ground up.
On the regulatory structure, there is a bit of a problem that our regulatory system is somewhat siloed. So, say OSFI, Superintendent of Financial Institutions, basically if it's not a bank, OSFI doesn't regulate it. And the fintechs are very careful not to call themselves a bank. And I actually think, though, we are now in the Bank Act gets reviewed every 5 years, and we're now in the period to review the Bank Act. And this is an opportunity, I think, to get the various players, Department of Finance, Bank of Canada, Office of the Superintendent of Financial Institutions, the OSC, working together to look at how do you allow for some safe innovation in this space, at the same time providing some leveling of the playing field. So the difficulty is right now is that the regulators, their mandate is to regulate basically banks, insurance companies. It's not to deal with fintech. So but the review of the legislation is an opportunity to do that. I hope we take it.
I think we probably have time for 2 more questions.
One over here and one over here.
Thank you. I've been coming to these presentations for years. They're always fantastic. Great content today. And I'm a change guy, how you started off with what's working. Thanks to Boris, Donald, and Nigel, we've started a conversation around the world about deindustrialized countries, and Canada is one of them. What I think is important about and this is more of a recommendation than it's certainly not a criticism, it's really important we get this message out into the broader media. The comment you made about Hamilton versus small towns in Ontario, that's the headline we need in the Toronto Star. Not about all the other stuff that goes on. There are 58,000 people in the marketing communications and marketing community. Maybe we could enlist their help to get this story out because it is profoundly important. So thank you very much.
I agree. Thank you. I mean, I think we were talking about this yesterday. I think one of the challenges with, say, a private sector solution to a problem and a public sector solution to a problem, and I see many friends from the public sector, they'll start nodding their heads. In the private sector, it was said yesterday, private sector designs products to relieve people of their pain. There's a pain point. Private sector tries to respond to that pain point so that someone will buy their product. Very rarely have I met a minister who said, I'd like to give the speech about all the pain and tell everyone what's wrong without generating a solution that I could absolutely guarantee them will get everybody to the other side of the river even better than they are on this side. So I agree. I mean, I think telling the story of where we've been successful, what we can do to be better, is something that we need to really take advantage of and face some of the real challenges that we have. I think we have one down the front.
Take one here, and we'll take maybe that one there.
Sure. And then come here. So I'll take the first one. There's 5 because Tiff said pick 5. So we started with 5, and basically we had an analysis based on the size and scope. So yes, there's a growing sector, particularly in the health sciences, but it hasn't reached the scope and size of these 5. So here's hoping that one continues to grow, but it just hasn't hit the same mark as these. So I'd love to tell you that it's number 6, but I'm also going to tell the other 7 people who come up to me afterwards and say, why didn't you include my cluster? You were all number 6. You were all tied. So.
Yeah, I mean, on that one, I do think there is some real potential. I also think there are some real challenges because of the single-payer model. There's a lot of great research going on in hospitals. There's not always a tremendous amount of incentive to commercialize it, and we do need to do better. We do have 4 world-leading hospitals down the street. I think Mars is starting to gain some momentum after a tough start. Getting J Labs in, I think was. You're starting to get some new tenants, some big players. So I think there is some real potential there. On automotive, as Jamison alluded to, I was deeply involved in the bailouts of GM and Chrysler in my previous life. I think the announcement actually you saw coming out of GM and the government a couple weeks ago, a tremendously positive step. The reality is. There is massive overcapacity in cars globally, and as we move, to particularly autonomous cars, effectively the whole car model is going to change dramatically. We probably won't own a car. We'll probably call a car on an Uber-like app on our phone. If we're going downtown, we'll just get a little one. If we're going away for the weekend, we'll get a big one. And so cars are going to be used much. Most of the time your car spends parked. So cars are going to spend a lot less time parked, but there's going to be a lot fewer of them. It's very hard to think of a government, a policy to grow the auto industry. But the other reality is cars are going to switch much less. What's going to make a great car in the future? It's going to be much less the metals guy, but it's going to be these are going to be highly computerized machines, and this, what Steve Carlisle and GM Canada is trying to do is they are trying to become a global hub for GM on AI, electric and autonomous vehicles, not just for Canada, but for GM global, and there's not going to be net growth in jobs. They're adding 1,000 jobs, but they're probably going to be losing assembly jobs, but they're gaining engineer, computer science jobs. That's exactly the kind of pivot we need to do. We talk a lot about innovation and startups, and I'm all in favor of startups and ventures, and that's a big part of creating companies that don't even exist. But we do need to do a better job of reinventing some of the big companies we have. And so, I think this play by GM is very exciting. The other thing is U of T is actually a world, getting back to the talent hub, U of T is a world leader in artificial intelligence. Jeff Hinton was funded by the government, the Canadian Institute for Advanced Research, for 20 years. The government stuck with it. The AI experts call it the AI winter. There was a long period. Progress was much slower than expected. In the last 7 or 8 years, all of a sudden, there has been a rash of breakthroughs led out of Jeff Hinton at U of T. And one of the problems we're having now, he has a whole cadre of PhD students. These are world-leading experts in AI. What's happening? They're getting snapped up by Google, Facebook, and they're going down to Silicon Valley. What we're trying to do is we're trying to help them get roots here, get good jobs here, and the sort of thing that GM is doing is great. We've actually created a venture lab, a seed stage accelerator here at Rotman that helps, that is only focused on AI initiatives. And we're trying to help some of these PhD students create businesses here in Ontario, bring in experienced entrepreneurs, bring in VCs that are looking for investing in this space, combine that with the management expertise we have here, and help some of these things launch and grow roots. So, that's a good example of we're actually really good at something, AI, but if we don't act aggressively, we will not reap the benefits. And so using it in cars is a great example. That's probably a good optimistic note to end on. Thank you very much.
Thank you.